Rainier Avenue Radio.world is your 24/7 digital media hub. Tune in at Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and TuneIn apps.
All right. Welcome once again to Rainier Avenue Radio's weekly presentation of the impacts of the coronavirus on our community, South Seattle, as well as surrounding communities. We've been doing these shows since March 13th every week, and we will continue to do the shows to bring you important information about what's going on with respect to the pandemic's impacts and effects in our community. And I'm very happy to be hosting this segment today and have a very special guest, Jenny Gruenberg. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she works for the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And there are 19 affiliate chapters in the state of Washington, 19 affiliates in the state of Washington. It's a national organization. I don't want to take her thunder, but also, I want to thank her for being a transplanted Portlandian and staying here. And she went to school at Whitman College in Walla Walla with a degree in sociology, which is what I got a degree in. But she's probably doing a heck of a lot better with her degree than mine. But anyways, we'll just leave it at that. Jenny, thank you for coming on board. And your job title, I wanted to let you explain what your job title is for NAMI, but thank you for coming on board.
Of course. Thanks for having me, John. So yes, I work for NAMI Washington as their youth outreach coordinator. So that means that I oversee all of the youth programming that we do within Washington State. So I support all of our 19 local affiliates in offering educational presentations to middle and high school students called Ending the Silence, where we go into schools and teach about mental health and have folks who are young adults share their lived experience with students to really add a personal touch to the presentation. And I also oversee all of our NAMI on campus chapters. So student-run mental health interest clubs at colleges and universities throughout Washington. So that's just a part of what I do.
And like I said, there are 19 affiliates across the state of Washington. Now, we're talking about a national organization that's been around for 40 years. I mean, since 1979, and headquarters, I think, in DC, really. And what I wanted to ask you is, and I like to ask our guests, what got you into doing this kind of work? Was there any singular individual that inspired you? I know parents, etc., but this is one of the tougher jobs that I can think of, especially with the population you'll be working with. But please share with us, if you don't mind, how you got into doing this kind of work.
Of course. Yeah. So I have been working with youth for my whole sort of career so far. I've worked in the public schools in both Eastern and Western Washington. And when I was working there, I just saw that there was such a great need to support student mental health. And I think that's what really inspired me to take on this role, to think about how I could support student mental health across the state through presentations and educational programming. Growing up in high school and college, I also had my own struggles with depression. And so this is really personal for me, wanting to give back and make sure that people are able to get help early, because that's really one of the biggest things that we can do to promote student mental health and the mental health of young people.
Well, I mean, this has got to be one of the tougher populations to work with, because I look at some data. They're saying 1 in 6 young people, 6 years old to 17 years old, have mental health issues. But we know that that's not even the tip of the iceberg. We know that there's many, many young people in that age group who are suffering, it's not reported. We know there's an undercount. So again, thank you for dedicating your time and effort and your commitment and your passion. You say you have your own personal experience, and I can imagine why, like I said, and I also followed up on, there's this thing called the CRI, the Children's Resilience Initiative, and I'm going to be asking you a little bit about that. But NAMI, again, has 19 affiliates. You're in the Seattle area. what are the first kinds of things that you do? You work in an educational setting, of course, because you're working with students, young people. Have you been getting much support from local educational districts around here? I just have to ask you that, because again, this is one of those subjects that's really, let's be honest, it's kind of taboo. You know, there's a whole issue of the suicide, depression, the bullying, all of these things. And yet people are amazed and stunned when things like that happen, but it's there and there's an undercurrent of lack of knowledge. So please, you know, what is your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Just thinking about the way that COVID has really brought to light a lot of disparities that exist within our society as a whole, but I think has also really brought mental health to the forefront. We're seeing students that, haven't really experienced anything like this before, and then their own mental health struggles are also coming out. So I think that schools are really beginning to take this seriously, and wanting to work to support student mental health. But again, figuring out a way to offer that across the board is challenging. Implementing anything at that level is challenging, and it's kind of going school by school. But then also OSPI, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, is really making a commitment to working to support student mental health. I know that there's a new position called a behavioral health navigator that they've just implemented at all of the educational school district levels, so the ESDs. Within Washington, there are 9 ESDs, and ESD, or the Puget Sound ESD, also known as ESD 121, is the ESD that covers the Seattle area. And so there will be someone committed working at the ESD there who will be sort of that navigator for supporting student mental health. But I think, also speaking to your point around like the stigma that exists around mental health, I think that's a huge thing that we all have to address. And just also acknowledging that, mental health symptoms start to show themselves early. So 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses develop by age 14, and 70% of symptoms and mental health conditions develop by age 24. So, recognizing those signs and symptoms that may be the beginning of a mental health condition onset is really important. And that's something that we, as an organization, NAMI, really works to promote through our Ending the Silence program. So it's an educational presentation that's completely free. All of NAMI programming is free, where we go into middle and high schools and give a PowerPoint presentation about mental health, about what mental health conditions are, the signs and symptoms that someone may be experiencing mental health struggles. And throughout the whole presentation, we're really empowering students to be supportive to each other, and think about how they can support their peers, and also feel comfortable going to a trusted adult and seeking that outside support if they feel that they or a friend is experiencing mental health symptoms. So those are just some of the ways that we're working to address this, and hope that in this coming school year, our program can be more utilized, again, because it's free, can be offered online through Zoom or through schools' platforms, whatever they're using to do distance learning. So that's just one step in the process. Well,
this is really interesting because, this show focuses on the impact, the COVID, COVID-19, the COVID virus, coronavirus on families, especially, and this one was specific to parents and what the impact is. And it's got to be one of those situations where you're constantly together, you're going to be at home schooling, and just the stress of dealing with those issues, and the interaction between parents and children. Like I said, it's got to be daunting for organizations like you to reach out in breaking that wall of silence, number one. Number two, what kind of advice can you give parents? Because you do have a helpline, a national helpline, but you have a local office here, and we're going to give that number out. But I call you up and I say, man, I can't handle it anymore. My kid is getting on my nerves. I'm at the end of my rope, and my kid is withdrawn. What would you say to that parent or any parent? Yeah.
No, absolutely. That's a really important question. I think, COVID has had a huge impact on bringing mental health to the forefront, really. the social isolation that people are experiencing, just the anxiety that we're all experiencing about not really knowing what the future holds and having to, deal with the potential job insecurity, food instability, all of these things around meeting basic needs. So everyone's at this heightened level of anxiety. Also, if there's been loss or grief in families around, losing loved ones to COVID-19, or just, losing out on milestones, especially for students, like not being able to attend graduations in person. So there's this undercurrent of loss that goes through everything. Plus the, just this need for the physical safety, this constant thing of, will I contract the coronavirus? How do I make sure I'm not, putting myself in harm's way? So all of these things have been our reality since March. And now we're 6 months in and students are returning to school. And I think that it's very justifiable that parents, they're often having to work and support students homeschooling at the same time. It's a huge responsibility. So one thing that I can direct parents to immediately is just that, so NAMI has free online support groups throughout the state. If you go to namiwa.org, that's NAMIWA.org, one of the first things you'll see at the top of the screen is the link to all of our support groups. And folks are welcome to attend support groups either if they're experiencing mental health struggles themselves, or if they're a family member of a loved one who may be experiencing symptoms. And there are different times. They're offered every day, so you can pick the one that works for you. It could be the local one in your area, or it could be one in Eastern Washington that works at a better time for you. So they're open and free to everyone. So that could be a good first step to go to for support. But I think, just thinking about what parents can do to support their own mental health first, it is so important. Thinking about, really having that sort of open communication with their children around how they're feeling, but to the point where it's, being honest about what they may be struggling with or feeling, but not putting that burden on their children specifically. So, having that open line of communication is really important. Letting children know when maybe things are feeling overwhelming for you, or when you just need to take a step back and take some time for yourself, and setting those boundaries. And that's, the knowing that that's okay. Just like taking a moment to step into another room and give yourself time to take some deep breaths and recenter yourself as you then go back and spend that time with your family.
Yeah, that's a very good point you're bringing out, because as a parent, you're faced with, being the breadwinner. Let's say you might even be a single parent home, and man, the burden of maintaining your lifestyle, etc., working, but also the time it takes to homeschool your child, because most in this Seattle school district, it's all homeschool now, for sure. And I think there's some practicalities to that because of the spread of the virus, but it has to be a burden. So if you were to give a parent of a younger child, I mean, we're talking about middle school, high school, there may be a different level of engagement, but what about younger kids? Kindergarten age, first grade, second grade, what would be your advice and what would be your approach? I know it's not necessarily a group you work with, but you're the pro, and I think you have some very good things to share. Please,
Of course. Yeah. Well, I think it's important to note that children often take their emotional cues from important adults in their lives, like parents and teachers. So as I mentioned, it's important for us as parents to be able to express ourselves, but also to be able to manage our emotions well, and then also listen to our children's concerns, speak always with kindness, and to reassure them around what they're going through. If you're a parent that is having, and you're needing to sort of continually explain why, if your child's asking, why can't I go to school? Why can't I have play dates? Why can't I see my friends? Why is this still happening? When will this end? There are a variety of resources that you can turn to that kind of outline ways that you can talk with your child about COVID-19. OSPI, again, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, has some really good material around that. Kaiser Permanente has put together some toolkits for parents to use. And there's just a lot of really great resources out there that you can use as a parent that can kind of walk you through how you can have those conversations, and then also how you can think about making time for yourself so that you don't feel overwhelmed.
That's great. So, I think you kind of covered this a little bit, but I think you have some valuable information. I'm a parent. I have a teenage son or daughter. Their social connections have been really reduced. They've been cut down. Okay, I can sense this. What should I be looking for in their behavior? All of a sudden, it's, what do I need to be clued in on? If you can give me some ideas as to what I should be looking for and how I approach that child, because parents have a difficult time really sometimes talking to their children. So, please share,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think 3 things to keep in mind, and this is, when you're looking at behavior in all children, but I can also speak specifically to, middle and high school aged youth. But 3 things to keep in mind are intensity. So if you're noticing that your child is exhibiting some different behavior, how severe are those symptoms? What is the intensity level of how your child is behaving? The second is duration. So how long are these symptoms lasting? How long are these new behaviors taking hold with your child? And then also level of distress. So what is the level of distress with your child? How much do the emotions that your child is experiencing impact their daily functioning? And one thing to keep in mind through all this is that if symptoms are consistently lasting for more than 2 weeks, that's a really important sign that your child may be experiencing some mental health challenges that need outside help. But looking at some things to look for just in sort of young adults specifically, if a child, and again, also sort of taking these things with a grain of salt, because as I mentioned, COVID has kind of raised anxiety levels, has raised sort of sadness and loss in almost everyone. But again, looking at those specific things around intensity, duration, and level of distress. And if it's more than 2 weeks, that's when reaching out is really crucial. So if you notice that your child is experiencing excessive worrying or fear, that may, prevent them from getting out of bed, that may prevent them from engaging in their daily routine. So, or if they're not able to take care of their hygiene, if that is slipping, if things that they typically would do during a day, even though that looks different now that they're at home, if those things aren't happening, that could be a sign that your child may be struggling with their mental health. If they are, experiencing extreme changes in mood, so maybe they're really, they have a lot of energy and they're kind of hyper, and then the next moment they're sort of low and they're feeling depressed, that could be a sign that maybe there's some mood imbalance going on for your child. Also important to note that, if sleeping is a big key, some of the pillars of maintaining mental health are really eating well, getting good sleep, and getting some kind of physical exercise. So sleep really can be a sign that maybe something is off. Again, I mentioned if your child is sort of not on their normal routine or schedule, but sleep can be a big indication. Maybe they're sleeping all day, or maybe they're not able to sleep at all. Those could be something to look out for.
Well, you're listening to my very special guest, Jenny Gruenberg from National Alliance of Mental Illness, a local chapter here in Seattle. This is our weekly show dealing with the coronavirus and its impact on South Seattle community, as well as other communities, care of or on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. I'm hosting today, John Yasutake, but getting back into the discussion of the role parents are going to be playing, role parents will have to play in this, and we don't know how long this is going to be. That's the problem here. But again, the reluctance for many parents to just engage their kids in a real heart-to-heart discussion, that has to be difficult. But what if you have a child who has other disabilities? How do you bridge to getting to what's really bothering that child? If they have other disabilities, that may be, that could have a factor in. I just thought about that because it's difficult enough to deal with young people, if they don't lack any sensory disability or, all of those things. But what if they are, disabled, and how do you deal with that as a parent?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, co-occurring disorders are really common. So, if someone is experiencing a mental health condition, they may also have a physical condition that they're dealing with at the same time, or some other disability. And I think, for those who have co-occurring disorders, or for those who are just simply experiencing mental health challenges, one of the best ways to begin the conversation around mental health is approaching it with compassion and empathy, and noting specific things that you're seeing in your child's behavior. So, starting a conversation with, hey, I noticed that you seem, you're in bed a little bit longer than maybe I've seen you before, or it seems like you're staying up a little late. And to say those things in a way that feels like kind and loving and reassuring, and really is just trying to note specific behaviors. And then always saying, like, how are you doing? Are you feeling okay? I've noticed these specific things. And I've noticed that maybe you don't seem to be, or maybe you're feeling different than maybe how you always were. And again, these conversations can be tricky and difficult to have, but I think that noting those specific behaviors, bringing them to the attention of your child, and asking them to talk about it, and to talk about how they've been acting, and if it's something that has been different from how they typically act.
Let me just change up a little bit. I saw the CRI acronym, the Children's Resilience Initiative. Could you give us a little bit of insight about your involvement with CRI? Yeah,
definitely. And actually, they now go by the Community Resilience Initiative. I forgot to update that. Sorry. Okay. But they're an organization that is based out of Walla Walla, and are really trying to do work around ensuring that the whole community is trauma informed. Okay. And so basically in educating folks around what ACEs are, or adverse childhood experiences, and how when children experience trauma or adversity when they're young, that can have a lifelong impact. And one of the best ways to mitigate that, childhood trauma is by having a strong, caring adult in their life that they can turn to for support. So CRI really works to educate whole communities around how to sustainably implement trauma-informed care practices, which include teaching about ACEs, but also about resiliency, how to foster resiliency in young people.
Wow, that's great. I mean, so COVID-19, or the coronavirus, has really changed our game plan, your game plan, everyone's game plan, even our studio game. I mean, our broadcast game plan. We're doing everything on Zoom. Okay, I wanted to ask you, if you had a chance to sit down with somebody in our legislature, somebody in our government, because we know that mental health funding has been cut severely over the last decade, less than a decade, what I know about it. What would you say to that person, somebody who has the ability to be an advocate and champion for it at our government level? And I'm putting you on the spot, but what would you say,
I think I would just stress the importance of early mental health education and the importance of social emotional learning, which is something that Washington State is already kind of taking the lead on, but just ensuring that social emotional learning is happening from the moment that students enter school, that they're learning skills about how to cope, about how to build resiliency from the time that they're how to recognize emotions and control their own behavior through that recognition. And that's happening at a young age, and that the whole school is on board and the whole community is on board and supporting a child in that development. So just really stressing the importance of social emotional learning, and also mental health education, behavioral health education, all of that coming into schools early so that students can recognize these signs and become resilient in that way.
Well, that's great, because, again, these are taboo subjects that at least my generation and subsequent generations, they just didn't talk about things like this. And, And that's very good. It's important. I mean, holistically, you have to look at the person holistically, reading, writing, arithmetic, but there's an issue, the social, emotional development, all of those things. So you're doing this as a profession. Do you have any other plans to move on and to become a direct, clinician, a therapist, things like that? This is a personal question, but you have such a great insight and a passion for this. I think you'd be a great, well, I shouldn't say that, but I think you would be a great clinician or practitioner. What about that? Is that something you're looking at on the horizon, I guess?
Yeah, one thing that I'm actually looking at, and I think is really looking to be a teacher in a lot of ways, because there's so much that goes into being a teacher around supporting student mental health, and everything that I've learned in my role here, I think has prepared me to want to be that classroom teacher that's going to actively support student mental health in schools.
Well, I think so. We're going to be, I wish we could go on. I mean, Jenny, I'm glad that you came on. Jenny Gruenberg from NAMI, which is National Alliance for Mental Illness. And their phone number locally is 206. I hope this is right, 783-4288. That's your main number. And I do want to say thank you. We're going to wrap it up. But Jenny, I would love to have another discussion with you about it and see how we're going farther down the road. I'm learning more about NAMI, which is almost impossible not to know. They're a national group that's been around for 41 years. So Jenny, any last words quickly, if you have anything you want to share real quick?
Yeah, just again, if you're looking for support for yourself or a loved one, going to NAMIWA.org and finding our support groups there. It's a great spot for free support.
Oh, and sign into that because they're doing a fundraiser tomorrow, which is the walk for, right?
Yes, we're doing our NAMI virtual walk your way, just as a time to recognize mental health and support it however you can.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm going to walk from my office to the kitchen and back. So that's my walk. So Jenny, thanks a bunch. And hey, folks, stay tuned to Student Athlete Advocates coming in. I owe this to Scott Ligo. He's going to have a show. But again, Jenny, thank you. And thank you very much for the work you're doing with a very hard population to work with. And continued success, okay, as we work through this pandemic, okay?
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thank you very much.